My name is Serena Caldwell. I am 31 years old. On the morning of what was supposed to be the best day of my life, I stood 6 feet from the man I had spent 4 years building a future with, and watched him lean toward my best friend, his lips at her ear, and whisper 3 words he had never once said to me the way he said them in that moment. I heard every syllable. The acoustics in that chapel were extraordinary. 212 guests sat in white ribbon pews, oblivious, fanning themselves with ceremony programs that had our names printed in gold script. The priest paused to turn a page in his book. The organist lifted her hands from the keys. And in the silence that followed, between one breath and the next, in the space that was supposed to hold the most sacred words of my adult life, I heard my fiancé tell my best friend that he wished she were the one standing beside him. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not turn to the congregation and announce what I had just heard. I turned to the priest, took the wireless microphone gently from his right hand, set it on the altar rail without dropping it, and walked down the center aisle of St. Catherine's Chapel alone. 212 people watched me leave. Not one of them knew what I had already done that morning before I ever put on that dress. What they did not know was that I had spent 5 months building a life that did not require Marcus Hale's faithfulness to remain standing. This is that story. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not to the altar, not to the whisper, but to the night I met Marcus, because you need to understand what I believed I was choosing before you can understand what it truly cost me to walk away from it. And what it cost me, it turns out, was less than I feared and more than I expected, and I want to be honest about both of those things. It was a Thursday night in October, 4 years ago. I was 27 and working as a senior associate architect at Lennox Bauer Associates, a mid-size firm in Raleigh, North Carolina. We designed corporate campuses, medical facilities, adaptive reuse projects for historic buildings in the downtown corridor. The kind of work that requires you to think in decades, to design spaces that outlast the ambitions that commissioned them, to account for the way a building will feel to a person entering it on a Tuesday afternoon in 30 years, when the original client is long retired and the purpose has shifted, and the light is still, doing what you planned for it to do. I was good at this work. I was also, at 27, almost entirely defined by it, in the way that quietly lonely people sometimes pour everything into one vessel and mistake the weight of it for meaning. Marcus Hale was at a fundraiser gala for the Raleigh Arts Conservatory on a cool Thursday in October. My firm co-sponsored the event every year, and attendance was understood to be professional obligation dressed in black tie. I had worn a navy dress and brought a colleague as a buffer against the particular awkwardness of standing in a room full of people who are trying very hard to seem like they enjoy standing in rooms full of people. Marcus was there as a guest of someone from Grayline Partners, the municipal infrastructure company where he worked as a civil engineer. He was 34, tall in the specific way that fills a room without seeming to try, with dark hair that had just started showing gray at the temples, and a laugh that arrived about 2 seconds later than expected, as if he were always privately deciding whether something actually earned it. I found that delay disarming. He talked about load-bearing soil composition with the same ease that other people talk about the weather, and I talked about cantilever structures and natural ventilation strategies. And we stood in a corner near the coat check for 2 hours while the gala moved around us like a current we had both stepped out of. When he asked for my number at the end of the evening, I gave it to him without the slightest hesitation. That was not something I did often. It felt, at the time, like reliable information about the two of us. By December, we were inseparable in the specific way of two people who have discovered a shared frequency and cannot quite believe they were walking around without it before. By February, he had a drawer at my apartment, and we cooked dinner together on Sunday evenings and had a running argument about whether open shelving in a kitchen was a design choice or an act of domestic chaos. By the following autumn, we signed a lease together on a 2-bedroom townhouse on Meridian Court. a quiet street in North Raleigh with mature oak trees and a neighborhood association that sent monthly newsletters about composting initiatives and holiday light display guidelines. It was, by every external measure, the architecture of a life being built deliberately and well. I paid 60% of our rent because I earned more, and I told myself this was equitable rather than uneven. Marcus cooked on weekends. He remembered the names of my coworkers and asked about them by name at dinner. He made my mother feel like the most interesting woman at any table he sat at with her, which is no small feat, because my mother, Elaine Caldwell, is genuinely one of the most interesting women at any table, and she can usually tell when someone is performing interest rather than feeling it. She told me twice in those first 2 years that she thought Marcus was the real thing. I believed her. I had no reason not to. The proposal came in April of the year we moved into Meridian Court. We were on the back porch of my parents' house in Asheville, North Carolina, the cedar and stone craftsman on the edge of a ridge that my father built most of himself in the year I turned 9. My father, Graham Caldwell, is 63 years old and a retired structural engineer who now builds custom furniture in a workshop behind the house. And he is a man of almost no wasted words or wasted material. He taught me to read a blueprint before I could ride a bike. He taught me that a structure is only as honest as the intentions of the person who designed it. He had called Marcus 3 weeks before that April evening and had a conversation that Marcus later described to me as the most carefully attentive conversation any man had ever asked him to have. My father told me afterward that Marcus had been nervous in a way that felt genuine. I remember thinking that my father was not a man who was easily convinced of genuine things, and that his assessment mattered. My mother had strung lantern lights along the porch railing for Easter dinner, and they were still up in April because she said they made the evenings feel like they were worth staying in. Marcus got down on one knee on the cedar boards while the Blue Ridge folded itself in blue shadow below us and the lanterns cast warm gold circles at our feet. He opened a ring box, round-cut diamond, platinum band, simple and elegant, which is the only kind of elegant I have ever trusted. He said, "Serena, you make every version of the future look worth building." I said yes. I cried, the uncomplicated kind. My mother appeared at the back door approximately 35 seconds later with a bottle of champagne she had clearly been keeping cold for weeks. We stayed on the porch until midnight. My father shook Marcus's hand with both of his and said, "Welcome to this family." It was, to that point in my life, the most uncomplicated happiness I had ever felt. I want to be clear about that, because what came after does not erase what that evening was. It only changed what I understood about the person I had been sharing it with. Now I need to tell you about Petra Voss, because Petra is not a footnote in this story. She is half of it, and she deserves to be introduced the way I understood her to be, which is to say honestly, without the revision that grief sometimes makes you want to apply to the past. Petra and I had met in our first year of graduate school at NC State, 8 years before the wedding that did not happen. She was completing her master's in interior design. I was in architecture. We lived 3 doors apart in the graduate housing building on Centennial campus and discovered each other at the building's communal laundry room at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, both of us waiting on separate machines, both of us reading because we were the kind of people who always had a book inside a bag inside a larger bag. She was reading a biography of Eileen Gray. I was reading one of Carlos Scarpa. We talked for an hour about the way light moves through a building and what it does to the people inside it, about the difference between a space that invites you to linger and a space that moves you through, about whether architecture and interior design were actually the same discipline pretending to be 2 or 2 disciplines pretending to be 1. We were 23. We were both far from wherever we had grown up and in the very particular state of becoming people we had not yet fully imagined. That kind of friendship has a different density than most. It carries the sediment of who you were still turning into, and that sediment becomes part of the foundation. After graduation, Petra opened her own interior design studio in Chapel Hill. Voss Studio. She was talented in the genuine, non-negotiable way. The kind of talent that has an opinion about proportion, the way a musician has an opinion about rhythm, not as an intellectual position, but as a physical instinct. She understood how a room should breathe. I referred clients to her regularly because I trusted her work the way I trusted my own. She referred clients back to me. We had dinner at least once a month at a small Italian restaurant on Franklin Street in Chapel Hill that had been our restaurant since the first year of graduate school, where the host knew our order and the light in the back corner booth was always warm and amber and the right temperature for honest conversation. When Marcus and I moved into the Meridian Court townhouse, Petra came over for an entire Saturday and helped me work through the paint palette, the window treatments, the way the built-in shelving in the study should be arranged to make the room feel larger than its footprint. She knew every room in the home I shared with my fiancé. I thought that was what intimacy between close friends looked like. I thought it was evidence of trust earned over years. I was right about both things. I was simply wrong about where the trust had gone. What I did not know, not yet, was that Petra had been meeting Marcus for lunch every Thursday for 7 months. I want to be careful here, because not every Thursday lunch between two people in overlapping professional circles constitutes a betrayal. Marcus worked with municipalities and infrastructure, and Petra worked with commercial and institutional clients, and those circles do overlap. I had never been a jealous person, by which I mean I had never before had evidence that invited jealousy. But 7 months of Thursday lunches, consistent unmentioned without either of them ever referencing them to me in passing the way people mention the ordinary events of their weeks, is not a professional overlap. That is a deliberate omission, and a deliberate omission, sustained over 7 months by two people who each loved me in their own way, is something with its own shape and weight. I found out on a Wednesday evening in January, 5 months before the wedding date we had set for the last Saturday in May. I was working late at the firm, as I often did in January when project deadlines stacked after the holiday slowdown, and I sent Marcus a text at 7:43 in the evening asking if he wanted me to pick up Thai food on the way home. He replied unusually quickly, which I noticed only in retrospect, and said he was already home and not hungry. I thought nothing of it. I picked up soup for myself at a diner near the office and drove north toward Meridian Court. When I turned onto our street, I saw Petra's car parked one house down from ours. A dark green Subaru Forester with a parking permit sticker for Voss Studio in the lower left corner of the rear window. I had been the one who suggested that sticker design to her 3 years earlier when she was setting up the studio's visual identity. I had helped her choose the font. I sat in my own car at the top of the street for 43 seconds. I counted because when something unexpected happens and your brain cannot yet decide what it means, it finds arithmetic to do. Then I drove past our house and parked 2 blocks further down and walked back on the sidewalk, moving slowly, the way you move when you are not sure what you are moving toward. There were no lights on in the front of the house. The study window was lit. I stood on the sidewalk outside our townhouse and I waited. I do not know exactly what I was waiting for. I think I was waiting for an explanation to present itself that would make the parking permit sticker and the dark window and the unmentioned lunch hours arrange themselves into something that meant nothing. I waited 11 minutes. No explanation came. The study light went off. The kitchen light came on. And then, through the closed front window, on a quiet January street with bare oak trees overhead and my soup going cold in a bag on my arm, I heard Marcus's laugh. The specific one. The one that arrived 2 seconds after the thing that earned it. The one I had fallen a little in love with at a coat check at a gala 4 years ago. I turned and walked back to my car. I drove to the diner on Western Boulevard and sat at a 2-person table by the window and read building codes on my laptop for 90 minutes. Then I drove home. Marcus was in the kitchen eating cereal and asked how the project deadline was going. I said it was fine. I kissed him on the cheek. I went to bed. I did not sleep. But I did not sleep in thee. And that decision, the decision to say nothing yet, was the beginning of everything that followed. The following Monday morning, I made the first of several phone calls that would come to define the next 5 months. I called Rosalind Okafor. Rosalind is a real estate and estate attorney, 42 years old, with a practice in downtown Raleigh that she built herself in 15 years of meticulous, unglamorous, precision work. She had handled my parents' refinancing 8 years ago and my own investment property purchase in Durham 3 years before. A small condo that I bought as a financial hedge in my mid-20s because my father had told me that the best time to own property is always before you feel ready for it. I trusted Rosalind not because she was warm, though she was, in the efficient and honest way of someone who does not have time for performance, but because she was precise in the way that actually protects people. I called her that Monday morning and asked if she could meet me for coffee before business hours. We sat at a cafe on Hillsborough Street at 7:45, a place we had used before because it was quiet before 8, and the tables were far enough apart for a private conversation. I told her everything. I told her about the parking permit sticker and the 11 minutes outside on the sidewalk and the laugh through the window. I told her that I had, in the days since that Wednesday evening, gone back through the location data that Marcus had shared with me voluntarily 18 months earlier when we set up a joint family location feature on our phones, a feature designed for safety, which I had never once checked because I had never once had a reason to. I had checked it that week, looking back through the history that the app retained. For 7 consecutive Thursdays, his location during the lunch hours had been within 2 blocks of Voss Studio in Chapel Hill. Not at a restaurant Equid, distant between our offices, not at a mutual professional venue, at Petra's studio, for 7 weeks. Every Thursday. Rosalind listened to all of it without interrupting. Then she set down her coffee cup, folded her hands on the table, and said, "Tell me the financial structure of the wedding and the household." I told her. The Meridian Court townhouse lease was in both names, but the deposit had been entirely mine, and I had been paying 60% of the monthly rent for 14 months. The wedding deposits were primarily my family's investment. My parents had committed $32,000 toward the venue, catering, flowers, and the rehearsal dinner. Marcus's parents had contributed $9,000 toward the honeymoon and the rehearsal event bar. My personal share of vendor deposits already paid out was $11,600, spread across the florist, the photographer, the chapel rental, and the bridal party coordination. Rosalind wrote numbers on a legal pad. At the end, she looked at me and said, "What do you want to happen?" I told her I was not sure yet. I needed more information. She said, "Then let's make sure you're protected while you gather it." Over the following 2 weeks, Rosalind quietly audited the financial structure of our shared life and identified every point at which my name carried responsibility. She was thorough in the way of someone who has watched too many people discover too late that the life they thought they shared was actually a structure built mostly on their own credit. She sent me a secure document summarizing everything with the subject line, "Review before Monday." I read it 3 times on a Sunday evening while Marcus watched a documentary about urban rail systems. In the living room. I sat at the desk in the study, the same room where the light had been on that Wednesday evening in January, and I read the financial map of our shared life and understood, for the first time, exactly which parts of it were mine. In those same 2 weeks, I did something else. I called my father. I called him on a Sunday afternoon from the parking lot of a hardware store, which felt appropriately practical for the kind of conversation I was about to have with a structural engineer who builds furniture. I told him what I had seen and what I suspected. I told him about the lunch hours and the car on the street and Rosalind's audit. My father was quiet for 4 seconds. For a man of almost no wasted words, 4 seconds is an entire paragraph. Then he said, "Tell me what you need, sweetheart." I told him. He said, "Done." Then he said one additional thing. He said, "Your mother is going to want to make a casserole." I said I knew. He said, "Don't let her." Not yet. I said I wouldn't. We hung up. I sat in the parking lot for 3 more minutes and then drove home and made dinner and did not say a single word about any of it. The third thing I did, in those first weeks of February, was request a meeting with David Lennox, the managing partner of my firm. who had been my professional mentor since the year I joined Lennox Bauer as a junior associate. David was 60 years old and had built the firm from a two-person practice in the 1990s into a firm of 38 people with a regional reputation for sustainable institutional design. He was the person who had pulled my first major solo project proposal out of the junior pile and put it into the partners' review meeting without telling me he was going to do it, and then called me into his office the following Monday to tell me the partners had approved it and that I should probably start thinking about what came next. I owed him a professional honesty I did not always owe other people. When I sat across from him in his office on a Tuesday morning in February and told him I was ready to discuss the partnership track he had suggested informally the previous spring, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me with the particular expression of a man who has been waiting longer than you realized. He said, "Serena, I have been hoping you would come in here and say exactly that for 8 months." We met twice more that week. By the end of February, the terms of my equity partnership offer were in draft form, sitting in a folder on Rosalind's desk for legal review, pending my signature. Senior partner, Serena Caldwell. I had not signed yet. I was waiting until I knew what the rest of my life was going to look like before I put my name on the next chapter of it. But the offer existed, the path was real, and it was entirely mine. The fourth thing I did was begin quietly disentangling my financial identity from the shared architecture of our household. Not in any visible or alarming way. I opened a personal savings account at a bank separate from the joint account Marcus and I used for household expenses and redirected 15% of my monthly direct deposit into it, automatically. I contacted each of our wedding vendors individually and confirmed which contracts bore my name alone and which were joint. The chapel contract was in my name. The florist was in my name. The photographer was joint. I documented every detail in a folder I kept on a secure hard drive at the office. I did not cancel anything. I did not close anything. I moved through our life exactly as I always had, cooking dinner on the nights that were my nights, attending the venue walkthrough with Petra in early March as planned, sitting across from Marcus every evening at the table we had chosen together from a furniture warehouse on the edge of town, and I said almost nothing about any of the things I was thinking. I had spent 6 years designing spaces that required long patience. I understood that the most important work happens before anything is visible. Now let me pause here for a moment because I know some of you have been exactly where I was in those weeks, sitting inside a knowledge you cannot yet prove, watching a life you built continue to run like a machine, while something beneath the surface has already changed. If this is landing somewhere real for you, drop a comment below and tell me. I want to hear from you. And if the story is speaking to something you have been carrying quietly, hit subscribe before you forget, because what I am about to tell you happened 6 weeks before the wedding, and it changed the last piece of the picture in a way I did not expect. In the second week of April, on a Thursday evening, my phone rang at 8:15 while I was reviewing drawings at my office desk. The number had a 402 area code, Nebraska. I almost let it go to voicemail because I did not recognize it and I was focused, but something made me answer. A silver moon illuminated the calm lake surface, but danced with the even moo, creating across the water. Pine trees swayed trees, wrong with the arrangement of an ordinary evening. The woman on the other end of the line was Claire Hale, Marcus's older sister. She lived in Omaha with her husband and 2 children, and worked as a hospital administrator, and we had met twice before, once at his family's Christmas gathering and once at a summer cookout. And she had been warm and direct on both occasions in the way of someone who does not have patience for social performance. We did not have each other's numbers. She had gotten mine from Marcus's mother, who did not know why Claire was calling. "I need to tell you something," Claire said, "and I need you to know I'm telling you because I would want someone to tell me." I leaned back in my office chair and did not write anything down and listened to every word. She told me that Marcus had called her in January, the week after I now know the Wednesday evening with the car had happened, and had told her that he had fallen in love with someone, that this someone was a friend of mine, and that he did not know what to do about it. Claire said she had told him to end it. She said he had told her that he was going to choose me, that the other relationship was finished. She said she had believed him until 2 weeks ago, when he had called her again, and the way he spoke about Petra, still in the present tense, still with the specific weight of a person describing something ongoing rather than something concluded, told her that he had not done what he said he would. "I don't think he's ended it," Claire said. "I don't think he knows how to. And you deserve to know before you sign a marriage certificate." She spoke for 8 minutes total. At the end, I thanked her. She said she was sorry. I told her she had done the right thing. We hung up. I sat in my office at Lennox Bauer Associates for 22 minutes without moving, which I know because the clock on my desk is very large and analog, and I found myself watching the second hand complete its circuits the way I had counted seconds on Meridian Court in January. Then I called Rosalind. I told her everything Claire had said. Rosalind was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How do you want to handle this?" I told her I needed 1 more week to decide. She said, "You have time. Nothing changes legally until you sign the marriage certificate." I said I understood. I thanked her and went back to my drawings. I did not go home until 10 o'clock. I told Marcus I had been behind on a deadline. He believed me, or he performed believing me. By then I was no longer certain which of those things was happening, and I had accepted that the uncertainty itself was a form of information. I spent that week thinking about what I actually wanted from the outcome of all of this. Not what I was entitled to. Not what the evidence supported. Not what Rosalind could argue on my behalf. What I wanted. And what I found, when I was honest enough to look at it without the architecture of justification I had been building around it for 5 months, was that I did not want to stand at an altar with a man who loved someone else and know it and say nothing. Not because of what it would cost me. Because of what it would cost the woman I was supposed to be at 31. The woman who had learned from a father who never wasted a material and a mentor who never wasted a talent, that you do not build something knowing the foundation is wrong and expect it to stand. By the end of that week, I called my father and told him the wedding was going forward as planned and that I needed him to arrange something for me without explaining it to anyone. He said, "Name it." I named it. He said, "It'll be there." My mother, when I told her the wedding was still on, cried briefly and asked if she should still confirm the rehearsal dinner reservation. I said yes. She said, "All right." My parents are not people who need things explained to them more than once. The morning of the wedding was a Saturday in late May. The venue was St. Catherine's Chapel in downtown Raleigh, a stone building that had stood for 120 years at the corner of Blount Street and Edenton, with stained glass windows that had been replaced 3 times and repaired dozens more, and which threw colored light across the stone floor at noon, and pale gold light at 4 in the afternoon, which was when our ceremony was scheduled. I had chosen the chapel 8 months earlier, standing inside it on a Tuesday morning with Petra beside me, both of us tilting our heads back to watch the light move through the transept windows. Petra had said, "Serena, you have to get married here," and I had agreed. That memory does something complicated to me now. I do not try to simplify it. My mother and Petra arrived at my hotel room at noon. My mother sat on the edge of the bed and watched with the expression she reserves for moments she is trying to memorize, which is a habit she has had my whole life and which I find unbearable in the best possible way. Petra poured 2 glasses of champagne from a small bottle she had brought in her bag and handed one to me and said, "To the beginning of everything." I took the glass and watched her face in the mirror while my mother busied herself with a piece of ribbon on the veil. Petra was watching me. Not with warmth, though she attempted warmth. With the careful attention of a person monitoring a situation they are not entirely certain they have controlled. I recognized that kind of watching. I had been doing it myself for 5 months. At 2:47 in the afternoon, I went to the hotel bathroom and placed a phone call that lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. I called David Lennox. I told him I would be in his office at 8:30 Monday morning to sign the partnership agreement. he said. Serena, I could not be more glad. I hung up and looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. My dress was ivory. The light in the bathroom was warm. I smoothed the front of the fabric and went back out to the room where my mother and my best friend were waiting. We arrived at St. Catherine's at 3:30. The pews were full. 212 guests in a stone chapel on a May afternoon, the light falling through colored glass onto white ribbon and garden roses in ivory and blush on every surface the florist had been able to reach. My father was waiting at the back of the aisle in his good suit, with his hands clasped in front of him and his eyes red at the edges, in a way he would deny if I mentioned it. When I took his arm, he leaned close and said very quietly, directly into my ear, "You do not have to do this." I said, "I know, Dad. Walk me down anyway." He did. His arm was perfectly steady. Mine was steadier. Marcus was at the altar. He looked, by every measure available to 212 people who were watching him, like a man who was completely present in the most important moment of his life. The priest was Father Michael Reeves, a man of about 60, with silver hair and reading glasses on a thin chain, who had been conducting marriages in that chapel for 20 years and who had, I discovered later, an exceptionally good ear for the way a rune changes when something is about to go wrong. He began. The standard words of welcome, the ones that speak to the gathered witnesses about the meaning of a covenant and the responsibility of those who stand inside one. The room was quiet, in the way of spaces with stone walls and high ceilings, where even silence has texture. Petra was standing 4 feet to my left, in a dress the color of sea glass, holding a small bouquet of ivory ranunculus, which she had chosen herself, because I had told her to choose whatever felt right to her. She had texted me a photo of the ranunculus 3 weeks before the wedding and said, "Are these okay?" I had said they were beautiful. She had said, "Perfect," then. I remember all of it in that particular granular way that the mind records things it already suspects it will need. The priest was perhaps 90 seconds into the ceremony when Marcus turned his head. Just slightly, the smallest degree of rotation that a person could justify as meaningless if anyone were to ask about it later. He leaned, perhaps 2 inches, which is not a large distance in ordinary life, and is an enormous distance in a chapel at an altar during a ceremony with 212 witnesses and a woman 6 feet away who had been paying very close attention for 5 months. His lips were at Petra's ear. The priest had paused. The organist had not resumed. The chapel held that particular suspended silence that stone buildings produce when 200 people happen to breathe in at the same moment. And in that silence, Marcus Hale said 3 words that I heard as clearly as if he had said them directly to me, which I believe, in some part of him he could not control, he intended for me to hear. "I wish it was you." 3 words, said in the register of a man releasing something he has been holding for too long in a space that suddenly made release feel possible. I know that register. I have heard it in client meetings when someone finally admits the project has gone wrong. I've heard it in my own voice in the bathroom mirror at 2 in the morning when I stopped pretending I did not know what I knew. It is not a whisper of impulse. It is a whisper of conclusion. And Petra's face, in the half-second before she caught herself, was not the face of a woman hearing something surprising. It was the face of a woman hearing something she had been waiting to hear said out loud. Father Reeves looked up from his book. The organist's hand settled into her lap. Someone in a pew shifted, and the old wood creaked, and then the chapel was silent in the complete and witnessing way that only happens when a room full of people holds its breath without knowing why. I stood still for 3 seconds. I counted. Then I turned to Father Reeves. I took 3 steps toward him. He was watching me with the expression of a man who had seen enough human ceremonies to recognize when one was becoming something unrepeatable. I reached out my right hand, and he placed the wireless microphone in it without a word, as if the gesture had been choreographed. As if we had rehearsed this the way we had rehearsed everything else. I set the microphone on the altar rail, gently, the way you set down a glass that belongs to someone else. Then I turned and I walked. Not quickly, not stumbling, down the center aisle of St. Catherine's Chapel in a dress I had chosen for the light in this room, past 212 faces that I did not look at directly, because I was not walking for an audience. I was walking toward the door and then through it and then into the warm May afternoon outside, where the light was entirely different from the light inside, wider and more honest, the way daylight always is. My father was on his feet and at my side before I reached the third pew from the back. He had been watching for exactly this. He did not say a word. He took my arm and we walked out together through the heavy wooden doors, and they swung shut behind us, and I heard, very faintly through the stone walls, the sound of the chapel beginning to understand what had just happened. My father had arranged a car. He had done it 3 days before the wedding without being asked, because that is the kind of man he is. The car took us to the hotel. My mother arrived 14 minutes later. She came through the hotel room door and sat beside me on the bed and held my hand and looked out the window at the Raleigh skyline and did not say anything for a long time. Which was exactly right. Marcus called 11 times that evening, beginning at 6:47. I watched each call arrive and decline on its own when I did not answer. Petra called twice and sent 4 text messages. The last one, received at 9:51 in the evening, said, "Serena, please, I need you to know this isn't what it looks like." I read every one. I did not respond to any of them. I ate dinner from room service with my parents and went to bed at 11 and lay in the dark and listened to the city and counted, out of habit, the ambient sounds the way I had counted the ceiling tiles in January, and at some point before midnight I fell asleep. Monday morning, I drove to Lennox Bauer Associates at 8:20 and walked past the front desk and down the hall to David Lennox's office. I signed the partnership agreement at 8:32. My name went on the masthead that afternoon. Senior partner, Serena Caldwell. I drove home that evening past Meridian Court, which I did not slow down on, and thought about what the townhouse had cost me to build and what it had cost me to leave it, and concluded that the accounting was not complete yet and perhaps never fully would be. By Tuesday evening, I had moved all of my personal belongings from the townhouse with my father's help and the help of 2 colleagues from the firm. Rosalind had already prepared the lease documentation. Marcus was not there when we came. I did not engineer his absence. He was simply not there, and I did not ask where he was, and his being gone made 3 hours feel like a completion rather than a confrontation. The fallout, as it always does, came in its own time and its own order. Marcus sent a handwritten letter 7 pages long, 3 weeks after the Saturday in May. I will not give you his words in full because they are his, but I will tell you what they did and did not contain. They did not deny the whisper. They did not suggest I had misheard. They were the words of a man who had loved 2 people at once and had spent 14 months attempting to resolve that arithmetic in secret and had failed in a way that had become legible in his face. Every day in which he believed I had been carrying the knowledge of long before he admitted it, which was correct. He said he was sorry not for being seen, but for making me carry the weight of being the one who saw. He asked if I would ever speak to him again. I folded the letter and put it in the drawer of my office desk. Not the trash, not the bin for resolved things. The drawer for things that exist and must be acknowledged without being opened every day. Petra called once more in June, leaving a voicemail that lasted 4 minutes and 20 seconds, which I listened to in its entirety, sitting in my car in the firm's parking garage. She said she was sorry. She said she had been trying to end it for months and had not had the courage. She said she loved me, and that the love she had for me was not smaller for what had happened, only that she had let it exist alongside something she should have told me about instead of hiding, and that the hiding had made everything worse in a way she had understood only too late. I listened to all of it. I saved the voicemail to a dated folder on my phone. I did not call her back. Not that day, not the days that followed. I am still deciding what I owe that friendship and what it owes me, and I have decided that I am allowed to take the time that decision requires. Claire Hale, who had called me from Omaha 6 weeks before the wedding, sent me a card in July. White envelope, handwritten address. Inside, in her own handwriting, she said, "You deserve the truth sooner. I'm sorry we didn't give it to you." I put that card in a small frame on my desk at the firm, in the space where a photograph of Marcus and me at my parents' house used to be. It fits the frame exactly. My parents came to Raleigh in August. We had dinner at a restaurant downtown where the light was good and the table was large enough to breathe at. My father talked about the walnut credenza he was building for a client in Black Mountain. My mother talked about the lantern lights on the porch in Asheville, which she had decided to keep up year-round because she said there was no good reason to take down something that made evenings worth staying in. At the end of the meal, my mother said, "You know, we never thought he was quite right for you." My father said, "Elaine." My mother said, "What? She's the one who walked out of the chapel." "She knows," I laughed. "A real one. The kind that uses your whole chest and does not require anything in return." 6 months after the Saturday in May, I am sitting at my desk at Lennox Bauer Associates with my name on the door and the Raleigh skyline through the floor-to-ceiling window and a set of drawings on the drafting table that I believe is some of the most honest work I have done in 6 years. A community health center in East Raleigh, all natural light, all transparent materials, designed for the people who will use it for decades after the funding cycles have moved on, and the administrative priorities have shifted, and the building itself is still doing what it was always designed to do, which is to make the people inside it feel that someone thought carefully about what they needed. It is the kind of building that requires you to think about what survives. I find that I am very good at thinking about what survives. I think about Marcus sometimes, not with anger, because anger has a shape that requires too much maintenance. With something more like the feeling you have when you notice a structural flaw in an otherwise well-made thing. The kind of flaw that came not from carelessness, but from a decision to ignore what the materials were telling you because the deadline was close and the alternative was harder. He is a good engineer. He was not dishonest by nature. He was a man who fell in love with 2 people at once and chose the path of silence when the path of honesty was available to him. And the silence accumulated until a chapel and a wireless microphone made it impossible to maintain. I think about Petra with a grief that is more complicated and more honest than I expected, because the architecture of that friendship was something I had a hand in building, and when a structure you helped design fails, the question of where the fault line began is not always clean or comfortable to answer. She loved me. I believe that fully. Love and betrayal are not, unfortunately, mutually exclusive, which is a truth that takes a long time to sit with, and which I am still in the process of sitting with, without rushing it to a conclusion it has not yet earned. Here is what I have decided I know. I walked out of St. Catherine's Chapel on a May afternoon, not because I was brave, though I was, and not because I had a plan, though I did, but because the woman I had been quietly becoming for 5 months had built something that could hold her regardless of what Marcus chose to do at that altar. I had not built it out of certainty about the outcome. I had built it the way you build anything worth standing in, with patience and attention and the willingness to account for forces you cannot fully control. And when the moment came and those 3 words moved through the stone air of that chapel and reached me, I was not standing in rubble. I was standing in a structure I had built myself, and it was already standing, and it was already mine. If there is someone in your life who is asking you to keep performing a stability you do not feel, to show up faithfully for a version of your life that was built on someone else's dishonesty, I want to say something to you directly and without the softening that this kind of truth sometimes gets wrapped in. You do not have to burn anything down to leave. You do not have to make a scene, or demand an audience or wait for someone to validate what you already know. You only have to start building, quietly and steadily, the thing that will hold you when you stop pretending. It does not have to be dramatic. It can be a phone call at 7:45 in the morning with a woman who keeps a legal pad. It can be a conversation with your father in a parking lot. It can be a folder on a hard drive at the office that nobody else knows exists. The building happens before anyone sees it. That is exactly the point. What would you have done in that chapel? If you had heard those 3 words at your own altar, in front of your own 200 people, would you have stayed through the ceremony and addressed it after? Would you have said something out loud in that moment? Or would you have done what I did and let the silence answer for you? Drop your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to know. Not because there's a right answer, but because I think the way each of us answers that question says something true about who we are and what we believe we deserve. And I believe every person watching this deserves to know the answer to that about themselves.